I didn't get to reply to my earlier question to you, so you're going to have to introduce yourself and your credentials and why your ideas on pricing are just a little bit different from mine.
Yeah, so I think I've probably come from a slightly more cutthroat background. I've worked for a couple of very entrepreneurial businesses, but larger businesses, and they will look at things from a much more rigid, cutthroat economic theory perspective when they're setting their prices. So even though I'm your son, if people didn't know, and that comes through in my level of creativity and my own thoughts on pricing and my gut feelings about what's fair and what's not. The businesses I work for are capitalist organisations, so I have a capitalist view on pricing. So that's largely where I'll be coming from.
So it makes a good balance between you and I, because my views on pricing before now used to be very poor, actually. They were very artistic, and artists traditionally will think that will be taught to think that they are lucky to be able to create, and that we should give it away almost for free because we're so blessed with this ability, and we should give it away for free. So I'll just mention in sort of housekeeping terms why we're talking about pricing. It's something that appears in my Your Creative Business book as one of the really core items in the sort of teaching, and that it's something that I only learned since being very ill myself and finding myself with nothing at all, as Alan well knows. There was no pension plan, no insurance against illness. There were two of us in the business. My husband's income relied on mine, and we were absolutely stuffed. And this whole book and the group and everything came out of that situation whereby I realized that we as artists need to value ourselves as proper businesses, which we've never done before and which I'd never done before. And I'm now in four years into that sort of 6-year plan before my retirement date. Not that I'll be retiring, but you know what I mean. And so my sort of plan for charging goes up to a point, and Alan will point this out. The point in my little calculation, which is more instinct than maths, is that we should value every single one of our hours, and we should charge as if we had a degree in what we do. And that's about it, Alan. Can I hand over to you now?
Yeah, by all means. I mean, I think that's a really important place to start when you are pricing your product. I've read your chapter quite early on in pricing because you asked me to have a look through it before the book was published, and it struck me how much, even though you'd not taken an economics course yourself, how much it almost perfectly mirrored what the calculation is for the minimum price that you should set your product at. And that is what they tend to call that willingness to sell from an organization. And what that really means is if I can't sell for that price, I'm better off doing something else. I'm better off, and that you can think of this as a financial calculation. So if I can't make X amount of money from that product, I'll go and do something else. And your calculation was pretty good at doing that from the perspective of I'm better off being a creative business, or I'm better getting a job somewhere else. I could do something else and make that amount of money. So as a price floor for a creative business, it was an excellent place to start, I think.
Thank you.
But now comes the criticism. Still, in my opinion, it's still not enough. Coming from a brutal capitalist perspective, that's not how businesses would tend to set their pricing. Right. So that's the willingness to sell. That's how much you're willing to sell it for. That's not how much an organisation would charge for their products.
Can I just stop you? Unfortunately, artists tend to be willing to sell at even less than that without even thinking about their needs.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you should be very aware of when it becomes too little and when you should be going and doing something else, either a different craft project or going and working for a different organisation or something like that. But when you're selling your product, you are better thinking of what the customer is willing to pay. And that is a difficult thing to get to. We like to sell our products, we like customers to enjoy them. But by knowing that figure, what your customers are willing to pay for your product, you can choose a price in between your willingness to sell and their willingness to pay, if you like, that maximizes the amount of products that you can sell.
Yeah.
But also means that you're not rushed off your feet trying to churn out this commodity item that's at the lowest possible price that you can charge for it, draining yourself with that amount of effort that you're putting into it, not giving yourself any free time to do anything else for any other future products, any product development you want to do at a later date. So you've really got to pick that price that makes it worth as rewarding for you in terms of finance and rewarding to you in terms of how much enjoyment you're getting to make that product, and then giving yourself some spare time to develop something else in the future. Hope that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a problem with that, because you're assuming that the price that the customer is willing to pay is higher than the price we need. In order to make that calculation, you have to assume that the price that the customer is willing to pay is higher than the price we actually need to charge to stay afloat. So what would you say for creatives who say, but my customers will not pay that money?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, are you sure? Have you asked them? Because you're probably undervaluing your product. As long as you have some degree of capability in what you do, then you're going to be able to create a valuable product, and somebody out there is going to be willing to pay for it. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second I'd say is, if genuinely your customers are not willing to pay for a product that you can produce at that rate, the conventional wisdom is, well, you should be doing something else then. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah,
but it's true.
Yeah, but there is something to be said for accepting that you may have only half as many customers, and I'm sure you'll come to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's have a look at that, and I think the best way I can represent that is on a little diagram, because let's not forget, not all of your customers are going to be willing to pay the same price. Some of them will be willing to pay a lot more than others, and it all depends on how much enjoyment they get out of their product. I'm not a fan of miniatures, so my willingness to pay for one of your products is a lot less than one of your hardcore fans who love everything that you do.
Yeah.
And so if you draw that on a diagram, and hopefully I can zoom into this and you can see, what you end up is with what they call in business a demand curve.
Yeah.
So let's imagine this is the price that you have for a product, and this is the quantity of that product that you could charge, that you could receive. Basically, if your price is very low, you'll get a high quantity. If your price is very high, you'll sell quite a low quantity.
It's difficult to see that. Oh, yeah, I can see it now.
Can you see that now?
Yeah, yeah.
So this is what they call a demand curve.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about pricing, you've got a choice here. Say your willingness to sell is somewhere here. That's the minimum price that you could possibly sell is at this point. So that's...
Can you give us examples? Can you sort of put dollars on that? So
Sure.
because it's very difficult for us left brain people or right brain people or whatever, difficult for us visual people to actually understand that without a dollar value. Let's use dollars, because even though a lot of us are in England or in Europe, dollars is kind of an international currency.
Okay, so yeah, let's do that. So willingness to sell based on your formula. You said something along the lines of, I think it was twice what you think it's going to take in time plus materials. Is that broadly the right formula?
Broadly, yes. I mean, before that, you've got to work out how much you need to earn per year. But yes.
Sure. And that how much you need to earn per year is effectively what you could be doing something else and earning that money, right? So that's where that calculation comes from. So say I've got a product that I think takes an hour to make. I value my time at $10 an hour. So it's quite cheap, right? But let's for argument's sake, $10 an hour.
Yeah.
Let's assume it's $20 worth of work plus $5 of material. My absolute minimum that I'm going to put here is $25.
Now that makes sense. I'm beginning to understand that now. Are you understand? I can only see Christine. Are you understanding that, Christine? Does that make sense? That if he's willing to earn as little as $10 an hour, which is a very low amount, but doubled would be 20. Plus materials, which would be, say, 5. You're talking about an absolute minimum of $25. Is that right?
That's effectively the calculation I've done. You probably can't see that, but this is actually backwards. So I've done a reasonably good job at writing $25 backwards.
Unfortunately, no, we can't. Can you write 2 5 and a big? That's better.
There we go.
Yeah. We see a lovely shiny light, but yes, that's much better.
So you've got a whole host of customers here that would be willing to charge more than that. And you've got to decide, do I want to charge...
Willing to pay more than that. She does see it, yeah.
Yeah. So they're willing to pay more than this $25. Some of them down here, you're never going to be able to reach because some of your customers won't pay that. And here's a tip. If one of your customers comes to you and says, that's too expensive, be aware there might be one of them.
Yeah.
You might still have a whole host of customers that are willing to pay more than that.
Yeah, and there is a question, which customers do you want? Do you want the demanding customers or do you want the appreciative ones?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, absolutely right. And you really want people who are appreciative, I think. Quality customers are important. So at price 1, say I was to charge... now I'm going to have to do a backwards dollar sign. $30.
Yeah, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
So I'm going to charge $30. Say I get at that price, I get 10 customers.
Yeah.
At a different price up here, say I decide to charge $100.
Yeah.
So I'm really valuing my product now. I think it's a great product, even though it's only cost me 25, because that's what willingness to sell is. That's basic cost price.
Right.
If I was willing to charge, if I charged $100, but I still got 5 customers,
you've got
now I can do the maths. I can say, is it better to have 10 customers at $30, i.e. $300 worth?
Yeah.
You do that maths quite easily, right? 30 times 10 is $300.
Yeah.
Or am I better charging 5 customers $100 and getting $500 worth? Well, the answer is quite obvious from a capitalist perspective. I should be selling fewer of them, but getting more money.
And the the very important bit about that is that you've only used so many of your hours, and you now have extra hours to spend on marketing and personal development and improving your product, because artists mustn't stand still. That
kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's in fact, and the higher you pay, the more you can discount as well. The higher your base price, the more you can find that wholesale customer or whatever, that you can say, our normal price is $100. But of course, we understand that that you're doing all the marketing and all this, and paying for all the premises, etc. And that means that you can pass the difficult customers onto them.
Mm-hmm.
It's that 80-20 thing. I can't remember what it's called, but if you pass the difficult customers on to somebody who is prepared to sell your product at that $100, but you've only charged them $50 or whatever.
That's channel sales, yeah.
That's what
Channel sales.
Channel sales, yeah. I mean, we like that. We like those personally. Frank and I love those, because we had over the years, we've had some tricky customers, and I'm usually pretty good with them. I usually will go a long way to help a customer and to understand that everybody's got their own story and their own reason for being grumpy and their own needs and everything. But there are a few that you just finally just don't want to deal with. And I've found giving a substantial discount to a friend to sell those products, and even passing on a customer, therefore losing half of your profit,
mm-hmm.
but you gain massively in the time that you don't have to spend dealing with customers, and the postage and the repostage and the calculations and stuff to help them.
And that's something that that kind of modifies the formula that you had in your minimum pricing, really. You doubled your time and assumed that that covered both the cost of making it and all of the ancillary costs. If you can reduce your ancillary costs by passing that on to somebody else, then you can stretch that formula a little bit and say, well, actually, I don't need to double my time there because I've got somebody else doing that bit for me.
Or you get so used to making something that you half your time making
mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah, the learning curve, as they call it. Yeah, now there's when we're talking about what a customer's willing to sell, something to keep in just a word of willing to pay. Yeah, word of caution. That doesn't work to the nth degree. You know, eventually you're going to get so many customers tail off. They're not willing to pay that amount of money that you start to make less. So there is a sweet spot. Yeah. And so what you've got to do really is get a view of what that demand curve looks like. And the way that you've got to do that really is by asking them. So in a large company like the ones that I've worked for, there are two ways where you can look at where you can find out how many customers are willing to pay for something at a certain price. The easiest thing is to look at the market that's out there, look at what other people who are making something similar to you are paying for, and use that as a benchmark. I think you and I have talked about this before. That's a bit risky in the creative business because lots of creative people undercharge.
They do, yes. How would you suggest, I mean, I've got my own ideas about this, but how would you suggest that people learn to value, please excuse me, learn to revalue their time in spite of the fact that there's cheapo stuff out there?
So that would really lead on to the second way that even a large corporation like the one that I work for now would look at it, and that is they would actually go and survey people and say, here's my product, how much would you be willing to pay for that? Now, you don't need to do a survey of tens of thousands of people like a big organization would. But you can say to your friends, family, and preferably some strangers as well, because you don't want to
Don't ask your family. Ask your family.
But I mean, that's kind of useful. If you get a representative sample of the general population, you can kind of find out, okay, well, X number of people would be willing to pay $30, and a substantially fewer number would be able to pay $100.
Yeah.
And you can visualize that and try and gauge where the best point to charge it is. And the other thing is, you are on a much more human level, you are naturally going to be nervous when you enter a venture. You're going to be in a pessimistic mindset, and you're going to undervalue your product. Just try not to. Try to realize that there are people out there that will gain some enjoyment from your product.
Yeah.
And a good way, returning back to my demand curve here.
Yeah.
Good way of thinking about that. Say you chose this price here, this $30 price.
Yeah.
You have 10 customers that have bought your price your product at a certain price. One of them paid exactly, potentially, one of them paid exactly what they were willing to pay for that product.
Yeah.
Most of your customers up here paid a lot less than they were willing to pay. And it doesn't matter where you choose your pricing, you're not forcing anybody to buy your product, right? So anybody who's below the line that you sell, they're not going to get any satisfaction. They're going to be neutral about the product that they paid for you. One of the customers...
I don't think that many of the people who are viewing this will understand that being neutral thing. Can you explain that a bit better?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't phrase it very well. If they didn't buy the product, they don't care how much your product was priced at. They might walk away going, that's too expensive, and grumble a bit, but they're not your customers. So you don't really care about those as much as you care about your customers, right? That's what I'm really trying to say.
Right.
Let's think about the people who did buy your product. They're the ones that you care about. One of them was willing to pay $30 for your product and paid $30 for your product.
But no more.
So they think, yeah, I was willing to pay for that. I'm kind of happy with that. I got what I paid for.
Yeah.
Every single one of your other customers who are willing to pay more than that price actually think, that was brilliant. I would have paid $50 for that, but I got it for $30. So every single one of your customers, bar the people who are right at that marginal price, are really happy with your product. And it doesn't matter where you set your price, it's still the same. Most of your customers are going to be happy with what they got, very happy with what they got for that price, because if they weren't, they wouldn't have bought it.
Right. So how many customers are you willing to lose by raising your prices? And that the rest who have bought the product will still be happy because they wouldn't have bought it otherwise. I mean, nobody starves for a creative product, do they? Nobody buys it because they're desperately in need of it. So it's always a luxury item. So in fact, whether the market is saturated or not is irrelevant if you can produce something that customer wants, and you have enough time to make the cat's on video, and you have enough time to make sure that you can improve your product. And this is where I went wrong for so many years. I charged way too little level, and I was still competing with people who were copying me, which I expected because I taught, but I never had any time to invest in improving the work that I did. So all the people I was teaching, whatever level they were selling at, were improving faster than me. But the ones that were improving the most were the ones that were selling at a much higher level.
Yeah.
Because they were earning as much as they needed to live in a shorter amount of time and investing more time in making more beautiful things. So in fact, I was falling behind my own students.
Yeah.
And that was simply through chasing the dollar. So chasing the dollar can be very counterproductive.
And it's so hard when you're living hand to mouth. It's going to be a lot harder to take that risk, because the other thing about selling fewer products is your income is much more staggered. You know, if you're selling things, hundreds of them for $10 a piece, you would expect those to come as a slow trickle, but constantly. When you're charging more, say you're charging $100 for a product, you might only sell 5 of those in a month, which can be a bit hard because I need to eat this week, but I'm not getting another payment in until next week. And that's a hard cycle to get out of. There's no real easy answer to that.
There is.
Okay.
My Frugalist book. Unashamed plug there. This is how we did it. We literally lived hand to mouth. My 5-year, 6-year plan meant that we literally had to live hand to mouth while we invested time in changing my way of charging and changing and all the rest of the stuff in the book, changing to a multiple layer income. I'm not even using the right language. Multiple income stream formula. And if you're going to improve your business, I think it's fundamental to get your pricing right and to live on next to nothing or as little as you possibly can. And this is really difficult for those people who have young children to take care of. But still, there's always a way that you can put more time into improving your business long term. And sometimes you just have to accept, what's it called, delayed gratification.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend to anybody to dive into a business knowing it's going to send them into poverty. But if you find yourself in that situation, you've got to find a way back out of it. And
living frugally isn't poverty.
Sure, absolutely.
Living frugally is living on the lowest possible income so you can invest more of your time into improving your business. And I think that's fundamental to any business, whether you are a millionaire or a pauper. That the less of your funds you spend on less important things that you don't need, the more you have to work to gain those things rather than work to improve your business. But
that's right. I mean, if you think of somebody who's started a business and have been successful and they make their first million, it's very rare to see somebody who makes their first million go out and buy an expensive car. They realise that the challenge has only just begun for them, and they've got some growth headaches coming down the line, and that it's only really when they've made their second million that they start to splurge out like that.
Or the third.
Or third, indeed. And most people, for most sort of solopreneurs, I think it's unlikely you're going to get to even your first million. So there's always going to have to be some of that frugalism what's the word? Prudence
Yeah.
and your spending.
Yeah.
And
I mean, these are all other conversations, but they're very important. I mean, our lives don't go in sort of normal ways. We don't have boxes that contain business and boxes that contain life and boxes that, and it all tends to come together. And I don't think that we should see it as having to live frugally all our lives. I wouldn't agree that that's the case. I'm not intending to live frugally all my life. I mean, yes, I am, because it's enjoyable not to damage the planet for no good reason, sort of thing. There is a pleasure of that. But there are so many things that you can do in a creative business that most people in a job can't do. I mean, all my working life, I've traveled, I wouldn't say for free, but the tax man took quite a lot of the burden. Whereas if I'd been working for a business, I'd have been working all year to get an annual holiday. And yet I did sort of four mini breaks.
We've got a visitor. Apologise for that.
Hello, Cat. So back to pricing, because that's what we're.
I mean, but what you're saying is related to pricing, because there is that that trade-off. It's what they call a race to the bottom. If you charge the bare minimum for your product, you're always going to be chasing that bare minimum of income to simply survive, because that's all that formula covers. It's your, as you say, valuing your time at a certain income level, which is effectively what I could do doing another job elsewhere. You're always only ever going to be working your body off to reach that income level. If you can charge that little bit more, then you're hopefully giving yourself a degree of comfort that you're not constantly working 60 hours a week trying to gain something just above the poverty line.
Talking about valuing yourself and what you could do in another job, it's worth mentioning that a lot of us don't have degrees. And that includes you, doesn't it, Alan?
It does.
And the reason why Alan has done so well in his life is because he has aimed himself at a type of work that he enjoys doing. And the years of study while he's done it has gained him more experience than many people who have degrees. And I think the same is true of, you're doing one at the moment, aren't you? Doing
I am, yeah.
Postgrad, aren't you? Yeah. But I don't know whether you want to tell people what you do, but while I'm on this subject, the amount of years that people put into a degree is 3 if they're doing it full time, maybe 5 if they're doing it part time or whatever. It can be longer, but if we artists look at how much experience we've got in what we do and stop saying we haven't got a qualification, because we have got a qualification. We've got the best qualification for what we do, especially if we're passionate about it. We rise to our own level, and in fact we don't follow the curriculum, we invent the curriculum. And so we have to value ourselves as if we've got a degree, or I think I'm very highly qualified in what I do. I think it's a master's at least, so we should be looking at the sort of income level that people with a degree have. If you've just left school and you're making a few earrings, maybe you only expect to earn a minimum wage per hour. But personally, I would quite like to earn 40 grand a year, thank you very much, for my level of expertise. So if I want to do that, I'm going to have to value myself much higher, and looking at it that way as if I had a degree makes it much easier. Because if I was working in industry, I would be getting that sort of level.
Absolutely. And another way of looking at it is there is only one person who can make Angie Scarr miniatures. There's only one person who can do.
No. There are loads of them. I've taught so many.
You're falling into the trap that you're asking your patrons not to fall into. You are. It doesn't matter whether you think somebody else's is better or worse. You have a monopoly on Angie Scarr miniatures, and anybody who's watching this who is a crafts person, be it budding or incredibly skilled, there is only one of you, and you should value that. There's a brand aspect to it as well. Now, when you're talking about degrees and what I was doing, so I've done well for myself in spite of not having a degree, but I am at risk of as much as people in the craft business of undervaluing my time. And one thing that I learned quite early on, I would go to work and I was incredibly creative, a problem solver. I work in the technology industry, for those people who don't know. And I'd go and work 50 hours, 60 hours a week, which doesn't sound like a lot to a crafts person, but for somebody on a 9-to-5 job, that's working too much. I learned early on that even though I was doing that because I enjoyed it, it would make people value me less. You've got to make people want it a little bit. You've got to kind of say, no, I'm working 9-to-5. If you want me to work more than that, as much as I would love to, I can't do that unless you're going to pay me overtime. And the same really applies for craftspeople. You want people, you love making the things that you make, and you want people to have those things in their hands so that they can enjoy what you've made. But you can't just, you've got to apply some value to it. You've got to say, if you want it, you've got to pay for it, really. There's nothing wrong with doing
that. Yeah, very good. Yes, if you want it, you've got to pay for it. That's because we all have to eat. Artists shouldn't starve, of course, which
absolutely
is
not.
Christine says, thank you very much. I'm not sure who else has been in, but those who haven't been in will pick it up on catch up. We are still a small group, of course.
Yeah,
thanks,
and if anybody has any questions, you can stick them on the Facebook page there, and I'm sure one of the two of us will be able to give some opinion on any questions that you might have.
And there'll be other people in the group who have their opinions on it as well. May disagree with both of us, and that's fine too. Okay, thanks. Kirsty, nice to see you, Kirsty. Good. She says it's really useful. I don't know whether you can see that.
I can.
Okay,
thank you for your time.
Let's go and have a cuppa. We've earned it. All
Excellent.
right. Bye.
Good
Thanks,
stuff.
Alan.
Thanks, everyone.